Join the army, they say. See the world, they say. Welcome to the world of Warcraft. Are you still touching me? I'd rather be sailing. It doesn't get any better than this.
Get off my lawn! With the bare basics of both the history and development of the genre already covered by my Warcraft and Dune 2 videos, this gushing entry will explain just why Warcraft II Tides of Darkness is a gaming masterpiece. Yeah, it's fair to say it's going to be hard to maintain any objectivity with this one. This RTS is akin to many of the games I've reviewed so far, in that I grew up playing them, allowing me to approach the subject matter with a degree of expertise, if not impartiality. This particular title, however, is part of an elite group that I've spent thousands of hours on. 3 months after the positive reception both critically and monetarily of Warcraft Orcs and Humans, Blizzard started developing the sequel with a larger staff and better finances. They also initially thought about including fighter jets before the idea was rightly shot down. Get it? Shot down? Like an airplane would be. Okay. Besides, nobody wanted games with radically different technologies clashing. Can you imagine a title that... Anyway, I usually reserve the negative points for the end of the video, but it's easy enough to get them out of the way now. Unit AI still isn't perfect, with some melee units having a poor reaction radius and deciding to go for a nap on their feet instead. Pathing can be spotty, but it's not a great source of frustration. Your unit selection cap is slightly higher than Orcs and Humans, but it's still less than modern standards. The original version of the game has a limited 640 by 480 resolution and doesn't have unit selection by type or build queuing. It also doesn't have smooth scrolling, opting for steps instead. It's also bordering on impossible to relive your glory days in multiplayer over the likes of an IPX network, which was revolutionary at the time, but is now an ancient relic compared to modern equivalents. Of the two factions, the Horde is clearly stronger, and much like Warcraft Orcs and Humans, this game arrived before multiplayer balancing was a thing, so combat can be a bit lopsided in multiplayer land, featuring liberal usage of knights and ogres with little else in sight. Cutscenes in the campaign are reserved for video alone, with no in-game advancement of the plot beyond the scrolling voiced briefing. The ever more frustrating element of the campaign that hasn't been fixed is the need in some levels to destroy absolutely everything in order to win. Later RTS games allowed the computer to surrender, or automatically ended the game once a non-win scenario occurred for either team. Here you might find your enemy has one farm or zeppelin left on the map, without the destruction of which you can't continue. This leads to needless pixel hunting, which bogs down the game. You'll note that I said original version before. There are a number that have come out over 24 years since its release. Wargus is a reskin of the open source Stratagus engine, adding a bevy of modern conveniences like widescreen support with high resolutions, no CD checks beyond installation, larger unit selections with advanced grouping, and the aforementioned build queue. This is as close to a modern day remaster of the game as you'll get, alleviating most of the aforementioned inconveniences. But while the sounds and all the campaign maps are there, it soon becomes apparent that this isn't quite Warcraft II. Much like Dune Legacy, it plays another game entirely while wearing a familiar skin, and veterans will notice that it has a different AI behind it for good or bad. The maps and units also clearly weren't meant to be played at 1080p or above, and I couldn't find a zoom function to resolve that problem, opting instead to drop down to a lower resolution so that my forces didn't look like ants. You'd think with a more modern engine the game would load faster, but apparently not. The only problem I ran into with Wargus was that the cutscenes didn't want to play nice, but they're dated at this point and can easily be watched online. The minor differences with units and interface are made up for by the modernity elsewhere. It's not perfect, but for the average Joe that isn't a purist, it will do the job and run smoother than any other alternative. It's also highly customizable, so you can play it your way. If you're not willing to sacrifice the heart and soul of the game for modern conveniences, and you don't care about multiplayer, then you can always try and get the original patched up and working in DOSBox, which is entirely possible with a bit of tinkering. There was also a console edition released called the Dark Saga, which featured a different interface and the ability to automate things like upgrades and training of units. As you can see already from the game footage, this is far from the definitive edition, with graphics worse than the original to accommodate the console hardware limitations of the time. In 1999, Blizzard released an updated version of the game known as the Battlenet Edition, with a boatload of improvements listed courtesy of WoWWiki. Originally, they were planning on titling it the Platinum Edition and providing a new campaign, but decided to scrap that and focus on the multiplayer support. It didn't satisfy all fans, with the music suffering choppy editing and a lower overall quality compared to the CD audio of the previous edition, and because it was Windows based, it was hit or miss on anything higher than Windows XP, causing headaches for many. This lack of future-proofing came after 7 years, when Blizzard decided to cease support prior to the release of Windows Vista. The decision angered a group of people who still waged war on Battlenet over a decade after the game's conception, and one particular Russian member of said group took it upon themselves to re-engineer the Windows version into a program that could work on modern machines and connect to private servers instead. Thus, the multiplayer-focused WarCraft II Combat Edition was born, and despite GOG re-releasing the Battlenet version with improved resolutions, I still prefer the unofficial one. It looks pretty nice, doesn't it? That's because I added cnc-ddraw, a DLL replacement that offers better rendering despite initially being designed for Westwood games. Neither the GOG or cnc-ddraw renderers will make the Battlenet Edition go widescreen without stretching the pixels. If you can't live without that, then try playing with Wargus first. That's what I eventually went with. I've struggled with both of the modern alternatives in the past, suffering from importing issues and graphical errors, but the latest stable versions of both Wargus and the Combat Edition largely ran fine in-game with minimal tweaking. After a few minutes of getting used to the game's quirks, you'll find that it's still very playable to this day. What were meant to be 20-minute recordings of footage turned into hours of unforced fun that had less to do with nostalgia and served more as a reminder of how good the classic formula is. So before we go any further, I'm telling you that with its timeless, cartoonish aesthetic, beginner friendliness, and multitude of versions and scaled up pixel art, WarCraft II itself does hold up. This is something that the folks at Blizzard understood back in the day. Games were meant to be fun first and foremost. The opening levels lay out the units and play like an upgraded version of the first game, with a gold mine that blows up before you have enough resources to complete the objectives, forcing you to come into contact with the Horde in search of a new one and witnessing combat. The same trick is repeated when you're made to capture an oil platform, introducing you to both the naval warfare absent from the first game and the new oil economy in a gradual and seamless fashion. There's a universal appeal to your troops, and they're given distinct personalities that match with the intentionally colourful palette of the world, including different colours depending on their faction. The difficulty is gradually ramped up as you learn how to transport troops, and each unit introduced is done so at a time where its use becomes quickly apparent in the context of the level. The game ensures that you know how to walk before you can run, and never throws anything at you that makes you uncomfortable. Much like in Orcs and Humans, the tile sets of the land change, but at no point is an attempt made to go for realism, with terrain graphics being purely representational. The composition of your troops has changed too. Spearmen and archers have been replaced with troll axe throwers and elven archers. While knights remain, raiders have been replaced by ogres. The Horde's catapult is still there, but the Alliance get a ballista that has identical stats. Clerics, necrolytes, conjurers, and warlocks have all been removed. Instead, there's a consolidation act, where knights and ogres get a few spells after much research, and mages and death knights hog the rest. Much like the first one, you have a series of specialised structures to train and upgrade these units from, and the campaign gently guides you through the operation of these. Finding buildings a bit pesky? Send in a dwarven demolition squad or their horde equivalent of goblin sappers, and they'll explode themselves in any structures or troops in your way. The biggest change in WarCraft II is the ship combat, and seafaring is a thing now, hence Tides of Darkness in the cover art, with elven and troll destroyers backing up transport ships and oil tankers. Battleships and ogre juggernauts also patrol the seas with lethal cannon fire, and the cloaked submarines and turtles serve as stealth vessels. Except they can be seen by air units. The non-combatant gnomish flying machine and goblin zeppelins serve as scouts, while gryphons and dragons patrol the skies looking for a fight. Just like the buildings, all of these units are introduced over the course of the campaign in a logical and progressive fashion, and that's what makes this RTS so appealing. WarCraft II is a gateway. It lures its players into the world of real-time strategy and scales accordingly, removing anything that would appear impenetrable to beginners while oozing personality from every element. The game also has a fully fledged map editor and skirmish mode, which means that it's infinitely replayable once you've completed the campaigns, sporting a series of custom maps and the ability to add a host of community-created content, downloaded off the then fledgling World Wide Web. For players of the original, it offers the option to slow things down and revert to the previous mouse style, as well as removing Fog of War, but the former is largely superfluous, as left-click to select and right-click to move became a staple of the genre for decades to come after this game's release. Speaking of release, why Blizzard haven't coughed up for a remastered version with Battlenet capabilities in the last 13 years is a mystery, especially since that's exactly what they did to both the next real-time strategies they'd craft. And it's at this point we come to the elephant in the room: the successors to the game and how they've placed this venerable classic in the shadows. The third Warcraft moved to 3 dimension. It was a quality title and a bestseller in its own right, and has also received a remaster. However, its sequel is not what Warcraft II lives in the shadow of, but rather the sci-fi inspired StarCraft, which began life as a reskin but evolved into what I consider to be the best game the genre ever created. Then there's Blizzard's own EverQuest clone, World of Warcraft, which everyone and their granny knows about. It had over 100 million subscribers. Most of them also bought the game outright on top of that, culminating in a cool $9 billion. Compared to all that money, the free games of the original trilogy only mustered a paltry 236 million, most of which was generated by the third title in the series. Chump change to be scoffed at, clearly. That's also the reason we haven't seen a Warcraft RTS in a very long time. It's a sad state of affairs for a game that used to be the best in the world at what it did, because it's been retroactively forgotten about by both the company that created it and the media who canonize other games from the same era or series in their lackluster countdowns. Warcraft II is available on GOG these days, which features the original Battlenet version to play online with and a modified enhanced version that has also suffered mixed responses. As of the publication of this video, the original CD-ROM version sadly isn't for sale. The fanbase wanted a basic visual remaster out of Blizzard at the very least. Instead, they got a bare-bones repair job of a game most of them have bought twice already and were asked to pay for a third time. Let none of this unfortunate history deter you from trying one of the alternatives before hitting the buy button. Give either of them a shot. You might be surprised at just how fun Warcraft II remains to this day. Blizzard's current billions are built off the back of the gameplay and themes established in this title, so any fans of Azeroth owe it to themselves to seal the tides of darkness and venture beyond the dark portal at least once. There's never been a better time to try this classic out. Speaking of which, there's never been a better time to get off my lawn!
Okay.